So here's example 10. And example 10 asks us something about this picture, namely the domain, the range, the x-intercepts, and the y-intercepts. And that also asks for f of negative 3 and f of 2. Okay, so we're going to take each of these and figure out what we're looking at. So starting with the domain, just to recall what we're looking at when we look for domain and for range. For domain, we're going to be looking at the x-axis, and for range, we're going to be looking at the y-axis when we're looking at a graph such as this one here. So to start with the domain, we got to look at the graph and ask, okay, what part of the x-axis are we using, or what part of the x-axis is this graph using? One thing to keep in mind is when you don't see any endpoints on the end, that's basically telling you that it keeps on going. And so I'll put some arrows up here just to show that this graph keeps going in both directions. What that means for the domain is that the graph continues to go like this. And so if you think about the x-axis, the graph continues to get bigger, and where it's using on the x-axis continues to get bigger. So the domain, as far as the x-axis goes, continues in both directions on the x-axis. On this end we'll say negative infinity, on this end we'll say positive infinity. And so the domain, again, since the graph keeps going in both directions, is parenthesis, negative infinity, comma, infinity, close parenthesis. And I'm using interval notation to write this domain, and that's how we write our domains and our ranges, is in interval notation. Now let's take a look at the range. The range is the y-axis. So does this graph continue to move all the way up and down the y-axis? You see the graph comes down to a point, but doesn't go any lower. So actually we have only some part of the y-axis, but not all of it. We're going to be down here at negative 5 and continuing up along the y-axis as the graph goes up and off the grid. So we start here at negative 5 and continue off up to infinity on the y-axis. To show that we're down here at 5 and the graph uses 5, or I should say negative 5, I put a bracket. The bracket is there again just to say, yes, negative 5 is part of this graph. So to write the range, I'm going to put bracket, negative 5, where it starts, comma, infinity, with a parenthesis next to it, because that's where it goes off to, is infinity. Okay, and then you got your x and your y intercepts. The x-intercepts are where the graph crosses the x-axis, and the y-intercepts are where the graph crosses the y-axis. So looking at the graph, where is this crossing the x-axis? Looks like it's here at negative 3, here at the origin 0, and here at positive 3. If we write these as points, this would be the point negative 3 comma 0. This would be 0, 0, and this would be 3, 0. So we have 3 different places where it crosses the x-axis. And we'll write here negative 3 comma 0 for the first point, 0, 0 for the second point, and 3, 0 for the third point. Do we notice anywhere where it crosses the y-axis? It does cross the y-axis right here in the same location as it crosses the x-axis, because both the x and the y-axis are together here in the middle. So there's only one y-intercept at the origin, 0, 0. Then the last thing to answer is f of negative 3 and f of 2. When you see these things, these numbers inside the parenthesis are x. So x, -3, and x and that 1 down here is 2. So just look at your graph, find -3, it's right here, for x, and then the answer that you'll write down is going to be the y that goes with that x. So let's see, we got -3. What is the y right here at -3? The y is 0 because it's right there on the x-axis. So f of -3 is equal to 0. And look at 2 here on the x-axis. Where do you see y on the graph for 2? So we'll trace our way from 2, figure out where the y goes on the graph. Y is down here at -5. So we'll say f of 2, again, is the y that goes with it at -5.